On October 14, 2004, on a special flight with only 2 crew members, a challenge testing the endurance of the aircraft took place right over the skies of America. In an effort to find the plane's limits, a serious incident occurred. The highway unexpectedly became the landing point for the aircraft. A tragic accident happened. The cause behind it contained many mysteries and unexpected errors in the aviation system. What is the truth behind these mysterious details? Is it merely human error? Join me as we uncover the truths and profound lessons from this tragedy. On October 14, 2004, at Little Rock Airport in Pulaski, Arkansas, USA, a CRJ-200 aircraft, owned by Pinnacle Airlines, was taxiing out of Little Rock Airport for takeoff to Minneapolis. After reviewing the aircraft, the captain discovered an engine-related problem. As a result, the crew decided to abort the flight and request ATC permission to return to the parking lot. ATC, this is Pinnacle 3701. We have detected an engine issue, requesting permission to return for maintenance inspection.
Pinnacle 3701, flight cancellation approved. Return to the parking area at Little Rock Airport. We will dispatch another aircraft immediately.
Just a few minutes later, the passengers were transferred to another aircraft. The CRJ-200's schedule for the day was canceled. Little Rock's engineering team was tasked with fixing the issues identified by the computer. By that evening, all repairs were completed. After inspection, the engineers reported that only some sensors were faulty, and they had been completely replaced. Finally, the CRJ-200 aircraft was determined to be in good condition and fully qualified for continued operation. However, Pinnacle Airlines needs the aircraft to be at Minneapolis International Airport, St. Paul, USA, for an early flight the next morning. Thus, 2 pilots, Jesse Rhodes and Peter Cesars, were assigned the task of flying the CRJ-200 to this location. Upon receiving the flight information, they could not hide their excitement. "Okay, Peter, let's get ready. We have an interesting flight ahead." "Sure thing, Jesse. This will be a memorable flight." Flight number 9E3701 has a flight route from Little Rock Airport to Minneapolis Airport, with a flight distance of 1,100 kilometers, and is expected to fly for 1 hour and 30 minutes. As mentioned earlier, this flight had only 2 crew members on board. The captain was Jesse Rhodes, 31 years old. At this time, he had 6,900 flight hours, of which 973 hours were on the CRJ-200. Rhodes was trained at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Before working at Pinnacle Airlines, he operated luxury Gulfstream aircraft, one of the most expensive brands in the world. The captain had a family and 2 daughters living in Sarasota, Florida, USA. He was known as a humorous and approachable pilot. Accompanying Rhodes was First Officer Peter Cesars, 23 years old. Being very young, he had only 761 flight hours, with 222 hours on the CRJ-200. Peter was a newly minted commercial pilot, trained at the Gulfstream Academy. Coincidentally, Peter also previously worked for this luxury aircraft brand with the captain. Therefore, the 2 pilots were very close. They both lived in Florida for the convenience of their flying schedules. The aircraft in service was a Bombardier CRJ-200 with registration number N8396A. Pinnacle Airlines leased it from Northwest Airlines, and it was manufactured in 2000. After 4 years in operation, it had accumulated 10,168 flight hours. At exactly 9:21 p.m., the plane began its takeoff. The massive aircraft created a roaring engine noise as it moved down the runway. "ATC, this is Pinnacle 3701, ready for takeoff on runway 24.
Pinnacle 3701, cleared for takeoff runway 24. Wind 270 degrees at 10 knots.
Prepared for takeoff, runway 24, Pinnacle 3701. Following ATC instructions, Pinnacle 3701 began taxiing down the runway and took off into the sky. After leaving Little Rock, the aircraft climbed multiple times during ascent, quickly reaching a climb rate of 10,000 feet per minute, equivalent to 51 meters per second. Not having to interact with passengers or perform related tasks like every day, the two crew members inevitably felt bored. Over 10 minutes after takeoff, Captain Jesse Rhodes suddenly came up with an incredibly bold idea. He wanted to operate the aircraft in a way he found more exciting. "Peter, without passengers, why don't we try something a little more adventurous?" "Oh, that's a great idea. Let's try a stunt." First performance. Encouraged by his companion, Captain Jesse Rhodes grew even more excited and confident in his idea. First, the captain pulled the aircraft sharply nose up at a rate of more than 3,000 feet per minute. The pressure on the cabin increased to 26, twice the normal state. Both crew members continued to laugh and enjoy themselves. "Wow, this feels amazing. Absolutely fantastic. Let me try next time." After stabilizing the aircraft, they began climbing to their planned cruising altitude of 33,000 feet, just as initially planned in their flight path. About 5 minutes later, Pinnacle 3701 was still climbing and at around 14,000 feet. At this point, First Officer Chazars suggested switching seats with Rhodes to try controlling the aircraft, wanting to sit in the captain's seat for a new experience. The passengerless flight led the two pilots to do some wild things. "Let me sit in the captain's seat this time. I want to try a new feeling." "Okay, let's switch seats." Once settled, both continued to joke around and were ready for the second performance. The autopilot was turned off and the first officer took control. Similar to the captain, Peter began to pull the aircraft sharply up with an extremely excited expression. He enthusiastically shouted, "Let's go." During this second playful maneuver, the aircraft endured a pressure of about 1.8 G. The aircraft ascended at a rate of nearly 4,500 feet per minute. Not only that, they also deliberately let the plane's speed drop to the point of near stall condition. Crazy shaking game. While stabilizing the plane, the two crew members continued to think of a new game. They decided to shake the plane a little by continuously turning the rudder. The two pilots continued to take turns controlling the tail rudder, causing the plane to shake violently. "Peter, this is awesome. What should we call this game?" "It's definitely the aircraft endurance test game. Have you tried this before?" "I knew it would be like this." More than anyone, they knew that constantly adjusting the rudder at high speed was extremely dangerous, but neither stopped. Both members became more excited than ever. They did not realize that their fun had started a terrible tragedy about to unfold. Challenge at 41,000 feet. After getting bored with constantly using the rudder, both came up with a new idea. This time, it was even bolder than the previous two games. The CRJ-200 has a maximum service ceiling of 41,000 feet, which is over 13,000 meters, and they wanted the plane to reach that height. "Peter, do you want to try going up to 41,000? That's a good idea, Captain. Let's join the 41,000 feet club." "All right, let me ask ATC for permission." At 9:35 p.m., the captain called the Area Control Center to request a change in the flight's altitude. "Good evening, ATC. This is Pinnacle 3701, requesting to change our flight plan from 33,000 feet to 41,000 feet.
Pinnacle 3701, why do you want to climb to 41,000 feet? Is something wrong?
We have no passengers on board, so we decided to have some fun and go up there.
Pinnacle 3701, climb and maintain 41,000 feet.
Climb and maintain 41,000 feet, Pinnacle 3701. At 9:36 p.m., ATC granted clearance, and the aircraft climbed to the new cruising altitude shortly after. After getting bored with manual control, the two pilots reactivated the autopilot. They set the autopilot to vertical speed mode. In case you didn't know, The vertical speed mode is a feature in the aircraft's autopilot system that allows the pilot to set and maintain a specific rate of climb or descent. When this mode is activated, the aircraft adjusts its pitch angle to achieve the desired rate of altitude change. Additionally, although the published ceiling is 41,000 feet, airlines always limit it to below 40,000 feet to ensure flight safety. This is because at high altitudes the air density is low, which can cause a lack of air in the engine's combustion chamber. When there is not enough air, it can extinguish the combustion chamber, causing the engine to shut down. The CRJ-200's autopilot system works similarly to other aircraft models. However, in this case, selecting vertical speed mode to climb to 41,000 feet was not appropriate. Vertical speed mode is rarely used at high altitudes because, in this mode, the computer focuses solely on maintaining the set altitude without considering the aircraft's speed. This means that even if the aircraft's speed drops to dangerous levels, it will prioritize maintaining altitude. Danger approaches. As the plane climbed, both pilots began talking about their excitement at joining the 41,000 feet club. Naturally, they completely ignored the flight parameters. So engrossed in their conversation, the captain did not realize that the aircraft's speed was steadily decreasing. Meanwhile, what the crew focused on was the altitude, hoping to reach 41,000 feet, as not many pilots have operated an aircraft at this height.
Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. You can do it. Keep going.
The low speed caused the nose to pitch higher, reducing the air intake into the engines, not to mention that the air is very thin at high altitudes. At this point, the crew realized that when the aircraft reached 41,000 feet, the nose was very high and the speed was very low. Additionally, the aircraft's electrical system showed signs of failure.
Wait, what's going on? Why is our speed so low? The electrical system is also flickering. What should we do, Captain?
Suddenly, the aircraft's screen displayed a warning that both engines had shut down due to insufficient air in the combustion chamber.
Damn it, both engines have shut down. What do we do now?
With both engines inoperative, the aircraft lost thrust and continued to lose speed, putting the flight in a stall condition.
Hold on. Peter, quick, switch seats, let me take control.
At 9:54 p.m., the worst they had feared happened. The aircraft entered a stall and started to fall. Effort to restart the engines. They quickly activated the auxiliary power unit and struggled to control the aircraft, desperately trying to restart the engines. After some time, the crew regained control at about 35,000 feet. However, the engines remained unresponsive. This meant there was no oxygen in the cabin, forcing the two pilots to use oxygen masks. While the captain was at the controls, he asked the co-pilot to restart the engines because they had only experienced a combustion chamber shutdown and were not broken. But even after 4 attempts, the engines still did not start. Tension was evident on both the captain's and the first officer's faces.
Try again, Peter. We need to reach a minimum speed of 240 knots. It's not working. The engines aren't responding.
After consulting the flight manual provided by the manufacturer, the captain knew they needed to maintain a minimum speed of 240 knots to get enough airflow through the engines to help restart them. But the problem was they couldn't reach this speed. The aircraft was descending rapidly and the engines were still not turning over, as if something was stuck. This was considered a very serious emergency, yet the crew still had not issued a Mayday call to ground control. At 10:09 p.m., after several unsuccessful attempts to restart, the captain decided to contact ATC for help.
ATC, this is Pinnacle 3701. We have an engine failure, requesting vectors to the nearest airport.
Pinnacle 3701, we copy. I'll direct you to Jefferson City Memorial Airport in Jefferson City, Missouri.
Pinnacle 3701. All right, we'll try to restart our engine.
The captain lied to ATC about their actual situation. Instead of saying both engines were out, he said only one was down. Additionally, the crew realized they did not have enough capability to reach any airport. Effort to find a landing spot. By this time, the aircraft's altitude was too low, and they continued to attempt to restart the engines in vain. The silence around them was terrifying. They realized they were facing a real crisis. At one point, the first officer even sensed the possibility of their impending death. As they descended further, they saw a highway ahead.
I don't think we can make it to the airport. There's a highway below. We will land there.
10:14 p.m.
ATC Pinnacle 3701. We cannot reach the airport. We will land on the highway. Pinnacle 3701, report your position.
The air traffic controller couldn't believe their ears. They kept repeating the question, but only received silence from the CRJ-200.
Peter, don't deploy the landing gear. We need to avoid the traffic. Got it, Captain.
Captain Jesse tried to assess the situation below. To minimize damage, the two pilots decided not to deploy the landing gear, as if the wheels were down, the aircraft would crash into many houses and vehicles nearby. As they approached the highway, the captain saw too many vehicles, and he decided to crash into the nearby woods instead. At 10:15 p.m., the aircraft crashed into a field outside Jefferson City. Both crew members were killed, but there were no casualties on the ground. Accident investigation. Pinnacle Airlines Flight 3701 crashed in Jefferson City. The plane plowed through an old warehouse, hit several trees, and exploded. Both pilots on board were killed, but fortunately, there were no casualties on the ground. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, conducted an investigation into the accident. Investigators were truly shocked when they heard the conversation and saw how the two pilots were playing with the aircraft. Even the CEO of Pinnacle Airlines was surprised at the lack of professionalism shown by the two pilots. He also pointed out that these pilots had poor flying skills and resource management, failing to promptly acknowledge the violations. The CRJ-200 uses two General Electric CF-34 engines, and indeed these engines were experiencing some issues with restarting while in flight, which the manufacturer was addressing. General Electric had notified that their engines had a risk of core lock if the engines were suddenly shut down and needed to be restarted while flying at high altitude. In jet engines, there is a system similar to a car's gearbox which uses gears to generate electricity from the engine's rotation. Two large gears are placed inside the main shaft of the entire fan system. The spinning fan drives the generators that supply power to the entire aircraft. The temperature in the combustion chamber is thousands of degrees Celsius, and when the engine shuts down abruptly due to lack of air, the temperature in the core drops rapidly. When hot, the gears expand, but when they cool, the gear farther from the combustion chamber cools first and contracts. When it contracts, the gear teeth no longer mesh correctly, causing the shaft to jam, preventing the fan from turning. This is why General Electric instructed pilots to fly at 240 knots for restarting. Strong wind passing through the engine would cool the gears more evenly, reducing the chance of shaft jamming. But the pilots failed to do this. Additionally, investigators determined that the two pilots were exploring the performance limits of the empty CRJ-200 on the flight. The pilots decided to test the CRJ's limits and join the 41,000 feet club. The chain of accidents began when the pilots performed some non-standard maneuvers at 15,000 feet, including climbing at 2.3 G, equivalent to 23 meters per second squared, triggering a stall warning. They set the autopilot to climb to 41,000 feet at a rate of 500 feet per minute, 150 meters per minute. This exceeded the manufacturer's recommended climb rate at altitudes above 38,000 feet. In their effort to reach 41,000 feet, the plane was pulled up at more than 1.2 G, and the angle of attack became too great to maintain speed. After reaching 41,000 feet, the aircraft was flying at 150 knots, just slightly above stall speed, and the engines were overworked. The aircraft's stall protection devices were activated at altitude, but the pilots continuously disabled the automatic nose-down function to increase speed and avoid a stall. After 4 overrides, both engines flamed out and shut down. In summary, the probable causes of the accident were the pilot's unprofessional behavior, deviation from standard operating procedures, and poor aircraft handling skills. The pilot's failure to promptly prepare for an emergency landing, including communicating with air traffic control immediately after the emergency involving the loss of both engines, and identifying available landing locations. The pilot's improper management of the dual-engine failure checklist. These points were also included in the final report of the National Transportation Safety Board on the accident of Flight 3701.